Salutations and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. My name is Kidology, or Kiddy, or Kid for short, and I make videos about anything and everything to do with modern life and modern society. Let's get into this video, because the school of life is at it again. I still don't know what to think about the school of life. I'm quite ambivalent. I sort of feel as if my reckoning with the school of life is like lying in a snake pit. On the one hand, I love snakes, and so I'm not afraid of them. But on the other hand, the idea of something slithering all over your body, it just gives me an uneasy feeling. I don't know what to feel about it, let's put it that way. But without going too far into that metaphor, let's watch this video.
For many of us, our strongest and at the same time vaguest desire is to be more creative. And when we think about what it would mean to be creative, we arrive at a dauntingly fixed range of jobs. We might be visually creative, and so we identify that we might want to be a painter, a photographer, a filmmaker, a designer, or an architect. Or we might be intellectually creative, and so we want to be a novelist, a journalist, or an academic. Or we might be musically creative, and so we want to start a band. The problem is that securing any of these jobs is, statistically speaking, almost impossible. We can end up blocked, sure of what we want to be, yet also unable to break into our chosen field. We end up with what we can call a fixation, rather than simply an interest, to signal the mixture of inner certainty and outer impossibility.
I think university is largely to blame for this, particularly since marketization hit. I would say that this began in the 1980s and is definitely sort of the primary characteristic of university culture. As more people go to university, as the university is increasingly seen as a business venture rather than a place of intellectual stimulation, where now one studies in order to gain a degree, in which university is seen as a means toward an end rather than as an end in and of itself. I think it's quite easy to contrast the idealism of university culture as seen in a book such as Donata's The Secret History, and cultivating knowledge and wisdom in gaining some kind of intellectual awakening and insights about oneself. A very sort of solipsistic existence within that idea of university, relative to what it actually is, which is now a place in which you cultivate a specialism, but not in order to go into that specialism per se. You can do an arts degree and gain a Bachelor of Arts, but you're not going to go into that field. You don't go to university and study English literature in order to become a writer, or study even science in order to become a scientist. A lot of scientists go into law, into patent law, that sort of thing. And there is no trajectory or no evident, visible trajectory of going into the field in which you study. And that is a very recent phenomena of university. And I do think that that can be attributed to the fact that the modern university it's a business. Its objective is not so much to cultivate the next leaders in specialist fields as it is to make money and make a profit. I do think that it is sort of something that is very, very odd about university, and especially as more and more people go to university. I personally don't think it is a good thing for more and more people to be going to university based on what it is. I think if the university was a place of knowledge and cultivating wisdom or what have you, if the university were not what it currently is, I would say yes, more people need to go to university. But as it is now, I do not subscribe to that in any shape or form.
The solution to such fixations lies in coming to understand more closely what we are really creatively interested in, because the more accurately and precisely we fathom what we truly care about, the more we stand to discover that our creative interests and their associated pleasures actually exist in a far broader range of occupations than we have until now been used to entertaining. It's a certain lack of understanding of what we're really after, and therefore a relatively standard and obvious reading of the job market that pushes us into a far narrower tunnel of options than is warranted.
Go on.
When we properly grasp what draws us to one creative job, we stand to identify qualities that are available in other kinds of employment as well. What we really love isn't this specific job, but a range of themes we first located there, normally because this job was the most conspicuous example of a repository of them, which is where the problem started, because over-conspicuous jobs tend to attract too much attention, get oversubscribed, and are then in a position to offer only very modest salaries. Yet, in reality, the qualities can't only exist there. They are necessarily generic and will be available under other, less obvious guises once we know how to look.
I think that's an interesting example, and it's an example of specialism and how we are now specialists and we are encouraged to be specialists, and therefore to reduce our talents and our interests to one particular area or one particular thing. And that is not human nature in any shape or form. We are not one-dimensional, but being one-dimensional is what works in the modern context. It's what works in line with functionalism and with the functionality and structure of modern life. And the issue with specialism is obviously that particular specialisms are oversaturated. There are many individuals aspiring toward them, and there's more competition inevitably, and that's just how specialism is. The difficulty in this is that modern education and increasingly, I would say, even modern university does not value creativity. And I think in this is specialism. I think with specialism there cannot be creativity because there is a set of criteria surrounding what you are doing, certain expectations, a typical job application or a typical job criteria establishes that they want a person with XYZ qualities and XYZ experience. You have to fit in a particular box in order to make it through a job interview, and there's no room for creativity in this. So let me briefly give you my take on what creativity is based on a stellar academic article I read. According to Professor Boris Gold, there is a general consensus that creativity refers to the capacity to produce things that are original and valuable. However, he disputes the conciseness of this definition by contributing an important point. His point is that there is dark or malevolent creativity, and not just impartial or well-intentioned creativity. There is a distinction to be made between passive creativity and active, intentional creativity. But in all this, creativity is about the individual and their personal growth and cultivation within and in response to their socio-cultural context.
Imagine the person who's become heavily invested in the idea of becoming a journalist. The very word journalist has become a coveted badge that captures everything they feel they want. From a young age, the job suggested glamour and stimulation, excitement and dynamism. However, the sector now happens to be in terminal decline and pitiably oversubscribed. A block and a lot of angst is the result.
The example of going into journalism, for instance, in The Devil Wears Prada. Andy, our protagonist, wants to become a journalist. But in order to do this, she has to appease Miranda Priestley. She has to go into a world which she is in no way interested in. Are you telling me that creativity is going to somehow make her experience better? I wouldn't call what Andy did, which was to embrace the fashion world, to embrace the expectations of working for Runway Fashion Magazine, as creativity. I would call it more so, on the one hand, a type of conformity, which is expected and which is fine, but also a relinquishing of actually what I would have called creativity, which was her rebelling against the expectations of how she was meant to look in such an environment. She wore her frumpy jumpers, her oversized skirts, and her very intriguing shoes. I would say that in a way that was actually creative, in the sense that it was unique, at least within that context and environment, and within the expectations of what a young woman within the fashion industry is meant to be and look like. I don't think that what Alan in this video is referring to as how to find creative work is actually creative. I think it's more about a change in mindset in order to make the work that you are doing more bearable, in order to make it seem creative. But I don't think that such things are just down to the individual. Creativity depends as much on context, as much on others as it does on the individual creative. I just don't feel that the modern working environment and your atypical modern job opportunities facilitate creativity.
Once scrutinized, we find that journalism offers some of the following pleasures: an ability to engage with serious political and sociological issues, to analyze policy, to write up thoughts with elegance, and to be respected for one's critical powers. Once such elements are clarified, it becomes clear that they cannot be uniquely connected to the sector that we call journalism. The combination can't only exist, and isn't only needed, in newspapers and magazines. It's not really tied to any particular sector. The qualities can and do turn up in a lot of other places. For instance, a financial investment firm might have a huge need to analyze emerging markets and explain their potential and their possible weaknesses to clients. A university might need to analyze and understand changes in its competitive environment and explain these in clear and compelling ways to its staff. An oil company might need to analyze its future likely employment needs and convey this to its recruitment teams around the world.
I disagree on that. I could, for instance, if I failed at journalism, go into motor sales, and I can sell cars by putting forward my arguments concisely and effectively. But will that be the same? Will that provide the same meaningfulness or stimulation for me as, for instance, being able to do that within the journalistic context, in which ideally one would be working for a newspaper or magazine where there's at least an element of creative and intellectual freedom to express one's opinions and perspectives on things? No, it's not the same, because again, the external context is so important, and I think that that is what inevitably, at least in the long term, in my opinion, would make one a far more meaningful endeavor than the other, namely making journalism, in which you are in a culture in which that kind of intellectual freedom and exploration and or investigative aspects of journalism are valued, over that of being within the context and environment of a showroom in which you're trying to sell a Mercedes-Benz.
The same analysis could be run around teaching. This doesn't, it turns out, have to be done in a primary or a high school. One might, in essence, be a teacher in an aeronautics conglomerate. You have to teach new recruits about the nature of the industry, or a wealth management firm. There you have to teach executives about how to deal with difficult clients.
A lot of what I'm getting from the School of Life is that it is very focused. I call it solipsistic, but that probably isn't the right word. But it's very individualistic. It sort of bases its analyses and its resolutions and advice around the individual, as if the individual has an impact on their external situation, rather than it being the other way round, or rather than it being a reciprocal relationship. Yes, there are opportunities to teach in other environments, in other forms of employment aside from teaching, but the external situation is paramount to why somebody may want to be a teacher. Teaching children, the young minds of the future, about, well, teaching them how to write and to read and opening their minds to different ideas is very different, and it's a very different experience for the individual and for what they value in teaching. I think one of the interesting things about creativity is that to be creative and to be inventive, there is an element of you not caring what other people think, not caring about the outside world. But in order to be in that position, the outside world has to allow you the space to do that. It has to provide you the context. It has to give you a canvas, in a sense, if that makes any sense.
This is not an exercise in getting us to give up on what we really want. The liberating move is to see that what we want exists in places beyond those we had identified.
There is, for instance, a difference between Jesus of Nazareth, a carpenter, and Jesus of Nazareth working for IKEA. One is utilizing creativity because it is something that is meaningful. It's something that aligns itself to a kind of virtue ethics of cultivating your craftsmanship. And the other, merely using what would otherwise be one's cultivated and cultivating craftsmanship as a means toward an end, and that end is profit. And again, context is everything. I mean, he says that this is apparently not giving up or being defeatist, but this is quite defeatist. I think a lot of this idea of changing your mindset in order to make your situation and your circumstances more bearable is synonymous to defeatism. But unfortunately, we live in a context in which everybody has to be incredibly positive and optimistic all the time, and everything has to be about making the best of things and creating this very filtered, superficial, external appearance that everything is a-okay and that everything is all right, everything is fine. And that's just not reality, unfortunately. And so I think that it is the same thing, just with a little flair. I would argue that contemporarily, some of what we deem creative in especially the domains of business, finance and technology, or broadly speaking in the domains of progress, can be classified as original nonsense. Such creative endeavors are common in bureaucratic processes and big business. However, it can be rightly distinguished from genuine creativity, which places agency and everything from one's thought and expression at the center of everything. Creative nonsense is what I consider the school of life's notion of finding creative work to be. Creative work is situated in our modern work environments which are highly bureaucratized, meaning that rules, regulations, and institutional processes do the thinking, as opposed to individuals. This is very much sort of aligned with something that I was saying in my previous video about defeatist politics being the politics of our age. And I think that this video sums that up, in which this video for me is quite defeatist because it sort of accepts the status quo, but it says that you can make it better by merely changing how you view it, by merely changing the blinkers that you have around your eyes, which tell you that creativity cannot actually be sought in this job which you loathe, or which seemingly on the surface has no creativity about it. But another thing with creativity is that creativity also requires a lot of energy, and that's something that's intriguing about creativity, in that you are working, you are laboring, but you are gaining fulfillment from it, which makes you want to do it. You know, it makes you want to create a work of art. It makes you want to sit in front of your computer and to write the next great American novel. That is what creativity is. It's using your labor, but finding fulfillment from the process, and also being able to see the outcome of utilizing all that energy, all that strength, all that labor, all that turmoil and emotional angst in something that is meaningful. I mean, fortunately, with creativity, you need an audience to appreciate that creativity. You need an external world in which to exhibit it, in which to gain something from it, and to give. And the modern world is just not for that. The modern world is not interested in that. that is not the priority. And so this video falls flat for me. Even this idea of finding other creative pursuits, other things to do, it's tricky when the efficiency and functionality of the modern world demands so much of all of us. So I'd love to know your thoughts on how you find the work-life balance, or in this sense at least, combining that into creative work. Thank you so much for watching. Look after yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.